Ooba Home Loans have released their home loan application stats for the second quarter. This is against a backdrop of higher interest rates. Last week, the Reserve Bank raised the repo rate by 75 basis points, taking the rate to 5.5% and the prime rate to 9%. But what are the reflections for the second quarter? Well, to tell us more, I'm joined by Careen McKinon. She's the head of sales at Ooba. Thank you very much, Careen, for joining us. Before we get into the bond market itself, the mortgage bond market, how is the property market looking in terms of house price inflation?
So the property market, and firstly, thank you for letting me join your show. Thank you so much. So the average purchase price showed a lower inflation growth at 1.8%. And we all understand that the current inflation levels are way above 6% in the country at the moment. So property inflation growth was slightly lower.
Now, post-COVID-19 lockdowns, there was a nice pickup in the property market with a buoyant mortgage loan market, of course, as well. Has that picture altered somewhat with the higher interest rate environment?
So the market, from when we went into lockdown in March 2020, compared to when we came out in June, July, August of the same year, there was a remarkable increase in the demand for property, and that was mainly driven at the time by first-time home buyers and lower interest rates. So with the rates having been on an interest rate cycle of an upward trend, we have certainly seen the sales numbers, and that obviously impacts the origination and home loan numbers, taper off slightly. But when I say we've tapered off slightly, it is still ahead and still above the pre-COVID levels, which is still very positive for the property market.
Yeah. What are you seeing in terms of banks' appetite to give 100% or in some instances 100+% loans to people in this very precarious environment?
So the banks are still very aggressive in terms of their lending criteria. And just today, one of the lenders actually launched that they were launching a new product at 115% to assist buyers that do not have the costs in a certain segment of the market. So the banks are very aggressive, both in terms of lending criteria as well as in terms of pricing.
Now, one of your observations in your report is that banks are quite keen on giving out 30-year loans. That's great, but surely that must be very costly for the consumer in the long run because you're paying interest for 30 years.
That would be correct. So over the longer period of time, obviously the total repayment, if the client continues to hold on to the property for 20 years, that would definitely end up being a higher repayment over the long term. But what we are finding is due to the interest rates having increased in this current year, there is definitely more interest from customers having a 30-year loan term, which helps to cushion the borrower against the higher installment and specifically assists the buyer in terms of affordability. So over a 20-year term, you might only qualify for R1 million, but over a 30-year term, you could actually qualify for slightly more.
So what is the outlook for the mortgage loan industry going forward, especially as it looks as though interest rates are not going to stop going up?
Mm-hmm. So the interest rate cycle will continue on the upward trend. That is certainly the forecast from the banks and from the economists in the country. We do anticipate that it will still climb towards the end of the year. But again, you know, the country and South Africa have been through some rate cycles where we've had 15% and 20%. And I don't think anybody is forecasting that we get to those particular high levels. So we're currently at 9% in terms of the prime lending rate, and we were sitting at 10% pre-COVID. So the market remains resilient despite the tough economic climates, and that's off the back of the banks being specifically aggressive in terms of assisting buyers with their home loans products in terms of cost inclusive, and we've seen that 80% of our applications had a zero deposit. That again is an indication of the bank's commitment to driving the property market and that their lending is still aggressive.
Careen, we look forward to speaking to you again in the future on what's happening in other quarters. Careen McKinon, she's the head of sales at Ooba.